So hi, this is weird, right? Thank you for pivoting with me. If you're here, I know you saw my emails from yesterday morning announcing this. You may not have known my cat Luna would be sitting here on the desk with me with her tail occasionally popping in. Um, she's very personable and does not like being left out. So um, she'll be around. Hi, Luna. Um, I I want to, as much as possible, still make this an active, practical day where we really get some practice about how to move forward on the final essays. And because I'm not like recording this just as a video without you, I am hoping that it'll be as interactive as a real class might be. In that case, that means that it is always okay to jump into the chat and say something there. It's always okay to speak out loud if that is possible and easy for you. You can always interrupt. I won't ever feel like that's weird or hard. I know everyone does Zoom classes a little differently. I know we're still kind of learning how to do it in this context. But like I said, I thought this would be a good idea, partly because I want you on this crazy election week to be able to um, chill out and do election type stuff, partly because you saw I got that email saying that I may have had brief contact with someone who was positive. The school and the county say I'm allowed to still work. I'm allowed to be around people masked, but I kind of thought, why not just take a little break? Let's shake things up, see how it goes. So I haven't started 100% starting this slideshow I'm going to use because I want to go over to Canvas first and show you something. I know I'm on a pretty big monitor, so I know sometimes when you share screen with a different size monitor, it looks weird on yours. So feel free to, you know, make this bigger or smaller as you want. But let me just show you a couple things that I've updated really quick. If you go down, you'll see, you know that as of last week, I had already updated everything for the rest of the semester. And I've added to this week, week 12, and next week, the link to the Zoom link. It's the same link everywhere. It's always going to be the same link, but I just gave it to you so you wouldn't forget. And so you can see that right now my plan is week 14 to have one more time that we'll see each other. So if you're like, I don't remember what's happening here, the simplest way to say it is we should see each other in class one more time, barring something else changing. Um, that's partly because I do think some people have expressed that they do like having face-to-face class. When I've asked you in class, there was a little bit of, yeah, this is good stuff. So I'm kind of trying to play for both types of students here. Besides that, everything else should be pretty straightforward. I do plan to have an 11 a.m. Zoom call on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, that last Tuesday of class before break, partly because I think that'll be an important day to prep a few things for your final screencast there. So I guess I'm just asking, is there anything else about the schedule that I can answer? Is there anything that is confusing here in this big mess of communication that I keep throwing at you? I see a thumbs up. Sweet. Well, then what I'm going to do is go back here and actually start my slideshow. You saw that I asked you to have your annotations out if you have them already. I know some have turned those in and some haven't, but also definitely have some place open to take some notes and maybe even like to do some writing and typing towards the end of this lesson. Like last time, I'll share this recording on Canvas, but I'll also share a link to this slideshow itself so you can go through this on your own. That's why it's a Google slideshow. Um, if you didn't know this already, when someone shares their screen on Zoom, it kind of takes over your screen. If that's you and you want to have more control, you can hit escape and then like have it like in a window. I think I've told you before, I often do that, hit escape, and then I have my other stuff open and other kind of windows around it. Let me start with just a couple of quick reminders. I already showed you the new schedule. I want to remind you that I have given feedback to every screencast I've gotten so far. If you haven't submitted your screencast yet, or if you haven't seen the feedback is in the grades section of Canvas. And I just want to encourage you, if you haven't submitted anything, today's probably a good idea to check in with me. I've had a lot of I think, really good emails with a lot of you about refining your project ideas, especially about kind of making them fit the parameters of the final assignment, which of course I kind of have memorized better than some of you guys. I know you have a lot of classes. So if you're at all unsure, maybe this is a good day. It's like right after class, just shoot me an email and say, hey, when can we Zoom one-on-one, or can we just like talk over email? So please don't forget that. Finally, there is a new page up on Canvas. I'm not going to go there and show you, explaining how to revise RA1 and RA2 if you don't like the grade. It essentially says that if you want, I'll grade a revision and I'll average your original grade with your new grade. Does that make sense? So if you got an 80 the first time, you revise it, and I grade the new one and give you a 90, I'll average those and I'll record an 85 in Canvas. If you do that, the one requirement essentially is that I want proof that you talked to someone about it. And that person can be me. We could have a Zoom. We could talk about the over email. Or you can take that to the Writing Center. I know a lot of you are really busy and you don't have time to do that. Essentially, you can turn in a revision all the way up to the Thursday of finals week, the Thursday a week after Thanksgiving. So that, again, is allowed if you want. And there is a page, it's in the top module of Canvas, way towards the top. You'll see how to revise.
I'm sorry, Kyle. Can you repeat that though? You were cutting in and out on my part, but did you say like any of the assignments we could if we revise?
I'm really just thinking of that as for the first two big essays.
Okay.
And I am sorry, my internet at home isn't always great, so it might be me, not you. But essentially, anything else you can just revise and get a better grade anyway. Like any small assignment, any homework, you can turn in late. You know, everything else is already like that. So this is almost being a little stricter because these are the only like really big essays you've written.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
No, no problem. So again, this page is up. You can find that. Thank you for hopping in and asking that. And please, anyone else, if I do cut out, like I said, my internet isn't always great up here. Let me know. So let's keep going. And what I want to do is kind of, I guess I should have given you like a preview of class today, but I first want to talk about a couple of things about annotations, specifically about citations. I want to do that fairly quickly because it tends to me to kind of be like less important. But I want to talk about annotations a little. I want to talk a little bit about summarizing, paraphrasing, patch writing, some stuff that has a little bit to do with that reading that I'm asking you to do for Thursday, which some of you have done, some haven't yet, which is fine. And then essentially, I want to move forward by thinking about how can you write at least 3 pages for next week? I know some of you are like, whoa, I don't even know what my topic is yet. I'd encourage you that even if you're still kind of trying, I would still try to get that in. I would try to show me that you've gotten at least 3 pages of messy draft in a week from today. That's kind of what I think should be your internal goal. So those are the 3 parts of class: talk annotations, talk summary, paraphrase, patch writing, and talk writing those paragraphs. So first, the way I want to start out is by, as you can see, just talking about some common issues that I see in the actual like works cited or references page for MLA people and for APA people. Again, part of me doesn't want to talk about this because when I think about the annotations, remember there's the citation part, there's the summary, and there's the evaluation. I think the biggest thing that you could be doing right now is asking yourself, where and how do I plan to use the sources I found? Honestly, where and how do you plan to use the sources matters most of all. If you start thinking, even, and we'll do this later, start thinking about, like, do I have an outline in my mind or written down where I can imagine myself putting this here or using this, this is what we talked about last time, using this with like a quick cite or using this as like an argument to respond to or using this as an argument to forward, to agree with, or any of those things we did in our class last week. I'm hitting things here in my office. And yet, citations still matter. As I've always said, citations are kind of like the coat you put on, the nice clothes you put on at the interview. It's that way to show, hey, you know what? I can follow really detailed rules online, and that can make me kind of look good in that first impression sort of way. When I grade your essays, the first thing I do is I grade your format score. It's the 5th thing on the rubric, but it's the first thing I do because it's the easiest. I say, okay, did they put their page number in the right place? Did they put their name here? I scroll down to your works cited, and I say, okay, does this look good? Does this look good? And I give a score, and then I read the essay. And as much as I try to not let that affect the rest of me, there is a part of me that's human, right? That could, if all of those things are so much in place, it's kind of like, oh man, this is looking clean. This is looking nice. They dressed up for this interview. So if you're an MLA student, if you're a student who is your major is in the humanities or the arts, hopefully by now you know which one. I want to show you a couple of citation issues. Education majors, APA people, nursing majors, turn your brain off for a second, or just like go get a drink or something. I will have some APA issues for you in a second. I just have 3 slides for each of you really quick. So what I did on the right here is these are the actual citations on the Purdue OWL's site as examples of citing web pages. So I just copied these 100%. I didn't even write them from scratch. I just wanted to make that sure that they were right. And you can see a couple things here that I added some notes here, just things to remember. The main thing I think, not the main, one thing I see is that people sometimes freak out when they don't have certain info. Like you see here, the first one, Susan Lundman has an author, but you might have gone to this WebMD athlete's foot site. It's kind of gross, right? Why is it an athlete? Whatever. And you might say, oh my goodness, there's no author named. And essentially, you don't need to freak out. If there's no author in MLA, you just skip it. You just don't put it there. There's no big deal. Same thing if their date of publication, right? You notice that this athlete's foot one has a date. It was published on the 25th of September, 2014, but the eHow didn't list a date. So again, you include it in the second one, but you just don't include it in the first one. So there's this really, I think, nice way that you can just like, you know what, poof, ignore stuff that isn't there. You also notice that the top one has an access date and the second one, and that feels random sometimes, but it's not random. It's because what they're saying is, you know what, eHow is a site that if you poke around in there, it's almost like a wiki site. It might be updated. There might be a newer version of this how to make chili site. They might go in and kind of add a new tip to that same page. So if that's the case, you can add optionally the date that you access the site. But the athlete's foot one, WebMD is not going to change that content. They're not going to publish it and then be like, oh, we need to add some more stuff. If they did, they would give it a new name or change it. So that citation didn't include it. My point here is that you have some choices to make, and that can be okay. If you're like, I can't find something, I don't know, I don't want to do it wrong. Sometimes that's the wrong question. Sometimes it's more of a, what message do you want to send your reader? I know we don't always think of citations that way. A couple other things I'll mention really quickly because again, you have access to this. MLA people, the most common errors I see always end with a period every single time. There's also in MLA citations, there's this really clear logical thing of going from something smaller that's in quotation marks to something bigger that's in italics. Something smaller in quotation marks, the title of the page, into something that's in italics. This page is on this site. So if you don't see that on yours, if you look at yours and you're like, wait, there's nothing in italics, you might be doing something wrong. You might have copied and pasted, in a way that left the italics out. That's what happened when I pasted these in. I pasted them and there was no italics, and I was like, oh, I had to go back and add them manually. MLA people, watch how you capitalize things. You notice that eHow on their site, they capitalize it that way. WebMD capitalizes it this way. So if there's like a weird, unusual capitalization scheme, that goes for authors too. You follow their scheme. You respect what the authority did. Otherwise, you capitalize things kind of in like your standard kind of, you can call it title case, the way you capitalize titles in most cases. One more quick page for MLA people. Sometimes people are freaking out a little bit about how to actually mention these sources in your essay. So I gave you some examples here, and the first two go together and the second two go together. You notice in the first one, it's the same sentence, but in one sentence, I mentioned the name of the author in the sentence, and in one I didn't, right? Let me just give you a second to read those. So you notice that Lundman, it's a website. There's no page number, right? It's not like a PDF. It's not a book. It's not an article that has a page number. So if you wrote this second sentence, Susan Lundman's eHow article, that counts as a citation. I know that's a little tricky sometimes, but remember on the final essay, you have to use 6 sources. And this second sentence, even though there's no parenthetical, I would count as a use of that source. And that's because there's no reason to put Lundman in parentheses here because the reader knows it's Lundman. You made it super clear in your sentence where it came from. Now, if Lundman's article had a page number, I would put a page number here. I would say, Lundman's eHow article, easier than you think, parentheses 65. But because there isn't, you just leave it off, and that counts. So what I would do if I were grading this, I'd be like, yep, you used Lundman, check. The second one, without an author, it's almost a little trickier, but the same basic idea goes. You have the choice of, are you going to use a parenthetical to tell your reader where to look this up on the works cited page, or are you going to mention it in your sentence? And you can, again, read those 2 sentences, you can see. You notice one in this third one, you notice that I put athlete's foot in parentheses because it's in parentheses on the works cited page. And I put a shortened version in parentheses because I gave you enough info to know which one on the works cited to go to. Essentially, when you think of a parentheses, you think of that as like a link. What you're doing is you're telling your reader, hey, this is exactly where you go on the alphabetical list of works cited to find this. Go to the A's. I didn't alphabetize these. Oops, I should have, sorry. Go to the A's and look for the thing that starts with the athlete's foot, and there you'll find the details. Go to the L's for Lundman, and there you'll find the details. And the same thing here. Even though there's no parenthetical, I know exactly what you're citing. In that case, I did decide to give it the full title because I kind of mentioned it in the sentence. It seemed a little more right. But again, I would count this as a use of the WebMD article. So MLA people, any questions about that stuff? I know I just threw it at you really quick. I know it might be stuff you know already or don't know. Can I explain any of that? I'm just going to pause for a second in case people are like typing chat stuff, you know. And you all can see in the chat, Ben says it makes sense. Thanks, Ben. Again, this stuff is like a pretty minor part of your grade. It's just the code, so I'm going to move on pretty quickly. APA people, same thing, really quick. Again, I copied the exact examples from the Purdue OWL site. A couple things that are weirder for you. Capitalization is wonky for you on citation page. You notice that, look at the Tuscan bean pasta. I only capitalize the T. We call this sentence case because it's kind of like a sentence, you know, you capitalize the first thing and nothing else. And then even the name of the site that it's on, Tuscan Bean Wiping Pasta, is a page on the site, Budget Bites for the Soul. But Budget Bites for the Soul also only gets sentence cased. So there's a weird thing with APA where you only title case capitalization certain kinds of things when you're on the references page. Look it up. You do not have to memorize this. I forget it all the time. Just use the Purdue OWL APA page to double check that. But when you're doing just a plain old web page, like which is kind of what I'm focusing on today, you essentially won't capitalize as many things as you expect. Okay. A couple of minor errors again that I see. You notice, like the last time, you may sometimes have an author like Price, and you may sometimes have a article that doesn't have an author. And essentially, the weird thing, the reason this worries APA people sometimes is because you have that date there, right? You have either a 2018, or if there's no date, you have the ND standing for no date. Essentially, if there's no author, it's like, imagine this Price one didn't have an author. You take the next thing and you just like, bloop, skip it before the date. You know, you like move it to where it wouldn't have been before. So if Tuscan Wiping Pasta had an author, this title would be bloop hopped after the date, if that makes sense. Notice that the periods, to me, is weird to kind of have no date, period, and then there's a period after that. That's because there's always a period after the date. Again, you don't have to memorize that, but just double check how that stuff works. I see a chat popping up. Dana asked a question in the private chat. I hope you don't mind me making this public to everyone because I do want to answer it. She asked if I got something from the database and it tells me how to cite it there. You know, you can cite stuff automatically in the database. Can't I just copy and paste that citation? And my answer is yes, you absolutely can. You probably should. The tricky thing is make sure when you copy and paste, you don't lose italics. Sometimes people accidentally lose italics when they paste. And sometimes those get kind of wonky in terms of capitalization. Like sometimes if I say I copied this Price one out of the database, it might have Price in all caps, capital P, capital R, capital I, capital C. And even if the database version has that, you should turn it into kind of a normal, you know, the way we would normally capitalize a name with just the P capitalized. But if you check capitalization, if you check italics, yes, copy and paste stuff from the databases. Notice that the rule here for APA people is the same, that sometimes I have a retrieved from, sometimes I don't. Oh, my email is still open. I'm going to check. I'm going to close that. It's the same rule. If you feel like it's a site that might update it, fine. You notice for APA people, you do not put a final period after URLs. Who knows why? That's what they decided. Finally, if I'm citing APA stuff in my essay, Here are a couple examples of how I might do it. Notice the first three go together this time. Uh, the first one is like, I don't use the name price in my sentence, so I say price 2018. That's the main APA difference, is they include the year. Say I mention price in the sentence, I still put 2018 in parentheses, uh, regardless of kind of what I'm doing. Here's the weird thing. When you capitalize titles on your references page, that's not always how you capitalize them in your essay. Look at laziness does not exist. In my essay, I'm like, hey, laziness does not exist. I give this capitalizing all the words that are longer than 4 words, 4 letters, but on my references page, I don't. To me, this is the dumbest thing about APA. It just drives me bonkers that you capitalize one way on the references, one in the sentence. The main thing is like, just as the last thing you do before you turn in the final draft, do like a capitalization check. Put on your calendar now, but say like, did you check your capitalizations everywhere? Might be like a point, who knows? Same thing here, right? Tuscan white bean pasta is capitalized different than here. And when there's no date, you actually say there's no date. No date. So again, APA people, any quick thoughts about that stuff?
Dr. Stedman,
Yes, ma'am.
do you mind giving a feedback on capitalization for the annotations we already turned in?
I would love to do that. Yeah, and I'm actually planning to. That's one reason. One thing I plan to do is tell you what you can look out for, what mistakes you made in the 3 that you turned in.
Okay.
So yes, thank you for checking on that. Let's keep going, right? I know I keep saying this part matters the least, and I kind of want to get to the good stuff. If you have read ahead to the source that I'm asking you to read or skim, or I told you on the discussion board to read at least 2 pages, they'll talk about these 3 words: patchwriting, paraphrasing, and summarizing. And I want to take 2 seconds and kind of show you the difference between those in practice. Partly because if you haven't read it yet, it'll give you a little bit of an idea, and partly to give you a sense of how this might affect you in your essay. So this is kind of part 2 of 3 of class today. I know it's just more lecture-y stuff, but again, interrupt me. So what I did to kind of have an example is I took a section from page 2 of that Woodmansee article. And I think this first sentence might sound familiar, even though it's been a while. Just take a second to read that first sentence or 2 and see if it sounds familiar. You remember what she was saying, that back in the day in the 18th century, people would publish books and they'd say, oh yeah, there's this whole collection of people who went into making the book. Sure, there was the writer, and there was the publisher, and there was the person who bound it, and the person who made the paper, and the editor, and they were all kind of this big old group of people. And now, of course, we say, this is this person's book, you know. So let me pretend that I'm writing your essay. Let me pretend that I'm writing an essay about collaborative authorship, and I'll tell you more about what I mean. And I want one of my sources to be Woodmansee. And I'm trying to figure out, how do I include her? Well, according to that source I'm asking you to read for Thursday, that article by Howard and Service and Rodrigue, I might do it in one of 3 ways. And one of those is called patchwriting. And I want to emphasize that when they talk about patchwriting, essentially what they're saying is, 1, it happens all the time, but 2, most professors wouldn't think patchwriting is actually okay. And I'm going to show you an example here of me patchwriting the first sentence so you can get an idea of what I do. It's that patchwriting is that idea of kind of just using the basic structure of a sentence from a source and still just kind of like looking for synonyms, you know, kind of fiddling with it in a really minor way. So instead of saying the notion that the writer, kind of saying, well, let me rephrase that to the idea that the writer. The idea that a writer is a special participant. How can I rephrase special participant? Let's just say it's a unique person. It's a unique person instead of a special participant. In the production process, how about the process of book writing? So the idea that the writer is a unique person in the process of book writing, and then she uses these dashes as like a parenthetical dash. The only one worthy of attention. How can I rephrase that? How about the most important person? And then she says, is of recent provenience, fancy, right? And I'm like, that's not my style. That won't sound like me. It's new. The idea is new is the basic sentence, right? This is a new idea. Um, my my point here, I think most of you know this, is that even though a lot of us do this all the time, uh, what our source, our article for Thursday is saying is that even though we do this all the time, uh, it is okay perhaps as a way of learning, as a way of dealing with a source, of trying to figure out what is Woodmansey even talking about. Like this can be a good exercise to do, but it's not an exercise where this sentence should end up in the final essay. Different people define plagiarism differently, but there are professors at RU who, if they saw this and connected it to this actual sentence, would say, you are plagiarizing. You are doing what you shouldn't do. And I kind of want to pause on that and be like, I actually do want to ask you either out loud or in the chat to say like, do you buy that? And do you think that's okay? In other words, like if a professor saw this sentence in your essay and they said, you plagiarize, you're in trouble for that sentence, what do you think?
I think as long as you have a citation, I don't think that's clear. An citation.
Nani, you broke up a little bit, but it sounded like you said as long as that citation is there.
If you have the in-text citation, I don't think that should be a problem.
Totally, I hear you. Anyone different? Does the citation change it?
Hey, I don't know if you can see me. I just wanted to argue. I feel like if you own up to it, if you own up to the fact that you used it when they like bring it up to you that, hey, did you necessarily get it? If it's needed to be cited, like if they need to have proof of it, you should be able to admit the fact that you used it. And if you decide to lie or whatnot, then I feel like there needs to be some sort of consequence.
Well, I feel like you're almost saying the same thing as Nanya. I wonder, because the citation seems to say, I am not trying to hide this. I think, right? It seems to suggest, I'm telling you where I got this. It's interesting, right? Because you hear that phrase, seems to say. I think a reader who's suspicious of that phrase, of that sentence, might be like, what is the student doing? What was the student trying to get away with something? Was the student trying to not do the harder work of paraphrasing or summarizing it in their own words, and instead we're doing the easier work? Is the student trying to get away with something? It might be the question a professor would ask. Anyone else? Do you think that student is trying to get away with something?
Well, if it's only just the one sentence that I don't think so. Like if the professor is coming after the student for one sentence, I think there's something more the problem, because if there's no other plagiarism throughout the rest of the paper except this one sentence that's patch written, that's something that, in my opinion, could be looked past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tricky. As you all know, a lot of professors and teachers in high school too are really freaking out about this stuff, right? So the idea of looking past even a single bit of plagiarism might be more or less something that some professors are interested in doing. When I got my master's degree at that college, if a professor saw even this much, the professor was required by the school to report it to the honor council, which was kind of essentially saying, like, we want this to be investigated. Even if the teacher wanted to overlook it, they were told by their bosses, don't overlook even this. It's tricky. I'll tell you on my end, I feel really complicated about it. If I saw this, can I just acknowledge what we all know is that, how would I even know? I get it. I understand that. That's actually part of the essay I'm asking you to read for Thursday, is that they actually looked up the sources to see what is going on that the reader doesn't always know. But let's say it's a source I knew. Let's say you did this with Woodmansey, an article I know, and I'm like, that dash, that style, it just sounds like her. And I looked it up. What I would do, because of that citation, I would email you. I would say, can we talk about this? Because it feels to me like you're pushing the boundary. And I would say, honestly, the sentence can't stay in there for the final one. You've got to, part of what I want you to do is take sources and figure out how to put them in entirely your own words, even though I recognize that in your own words is a really complicated, fraught concept that doesn't always make sense. Even with that, I would say to follow the academic standards here, I would ask you to redo it. I probably, because that citation, I would say, I bet the student probably is just learning how to do this well, and I bet they're not like trying to fool me. So I probably wouldn't fail you or anything. I probably would just let you redo it. But if we had that conversation earlier and then I saw it again later, then I'd be like, am I now being fooled? And to me, that's a big difference. If I feel like someone is intentionally trying to pull something over on me, that's very different than the student needs education on how to use sources. Does that seem fair?
Yes.
So let's look at a couple other examples here. By the way, I know this sounds like this is me threatening you use sources in the right way. It's not. This stuff is hard and complicated. We got to talk about it. So let's say we do paraphrasing. And the definition of a paraphrase essentially is taking something in a source and revising it into something that's of about the same length. That's different than a summary, because a summary takes a lot of stuff and boils it down to a shorter bit. A paraphrase is about the same amount. So I would call this a legal paraphrase. Legal is the wrong word. An allowed in academic writing and college paraphrase of that first sentence. No longer am I relying on Woodmansey's sentence structure. No longer am I relying on her particular words. The idea is that a paraphrase you should be able to do without the book or the source open in front of you. You know, I should be able to read her thing, look away and be like, what did she say early on? I think she said this, write it down, and then compare and make sure they're not too similar. I've heard people call it plagiarism, even if like you paraphrase multiple sentences in a row. One textbook I taught with actually said this. They said, if you paraphrase the first sentence and then paraphrase her second sentence and then paraphrase her third sentence, and all along it kind of, the reader gets the impression that it was your choice to kind of put those three sentences in that order, and really it was Woodmansey's choice to put them in that order. Some people would call that plagiarism. To me, that's on that line, tricky line, and I would have to see it to be able to make a judgment. I'm not sure what I think. But you see what I mean, how the difference between paraphrasing and patchwriting. And the third word, like I said, is summary. And you see, I changed the screenshot here to go to the full page, because a summary in general is the whole, it's a long chunk of text, sometimes a whole paragraph, sometimes a whole essay. So here's how I would summarize Woodmansey's entire essay. And this is actually getting at what really matters here. In the source that I'm asking you to read for Thursday, that Howard Service Rodrigue, they read 18 essays, and they say that they found no places, 0 out of 18, where student writers like you summarized a source. To me, my first thought was, you got to be wrong about that. How could that be possible? But if that is true, to me, it suggests a couple things. It suggests that students, or at least their students that they read, might not have been reading the whole article. Happens, you're busy. Might have been reading the whole article and not really understanding it. How can you summarize something you don't get? You know, if you're like, I read this Woodmansey, what is he even talking about? And you just kind of read it quickly, you go through it, and you're done. So of course you couldn't summarize the whole thing in that case. Or just didn't realize the value of it, didn't think that it was ever important. So I want to suggest that you might find yourself, when you're writing your own essay, I think you might find yourself wanting to say, hey reader, here's a source that I read. Let me super quickly summarize it to you in like 2 sentences like this. And then let me bounce off of it. Then let me tell you why I'm summarizing it to you. Let me tell you why I think this helps me make my own point in my own interesting way, in a very Harris sort of move like we've been doing. So I think, in other words, the skill of summarizing matters because it helps you tell your reader what you're not saying. You know, it helps you say, here's what she said, but now here's what I'm going to say. It's easier to say what you want to say if you're bouncing off of someone else. So what I want to do is actually in a minute show you a paragraph I wrote in my imaginary essay about collaborative authorship that includes this summary, or actually like a slight rewording of this summary. And one reason I'm telling you this is because if you are following kind of my recommended schedule, you've got summaries of 3 sources now. You might want to go back and kind of ask yourself, okay, did I summarize it in a way that actually does kind of briefly and quickly give an overview of what the article is actually, you know, about. But I wonder if those summaries could be useful to you. Like, I wonder if you're writing about them, if you could like literally copy and paste them into your actual essay and then kind of add some contextual stuff before it to kind of help the reader see what it's going to be used for, and then some other stuff underneath it to say what you want to say that's different. But I wonder if those summaries are good enough to just like use. Maybe, hopefully. That's why I asked you to do it. That would be great. So what I want to do is move into a slightly more kind of interactive is the word I want to say, but it's not the right word. And a little bit more like exercise part of class here, part 3 of 3. And I want to ask you to do 2 things. I want to start by actually pausing for a few minutes and asking you to try right now to write a sentence outline of your final essay. I know. Some of you are like, I don't even know what my topic is. I'm confused. I wonder, like, as well as you can, if possible, could you like literally try to outline it? And when I say a sentence outline, I'm saying this an outline where instead of just like bulleted words, you actually have bulleted sentences. The reason for that is because I think sometimes when you flesh your idea out into a whole sentence, like I have here, sometimes that gives you a way to, it just gives you more info. It forces more out of you. If you just kind of say intro, part 2, you know, if you just have phrases and words, sometimes I think you don't have as much to go back to later. I think sentences are fuller. So let me pause and kind of let you read this left-hand side so you can imagine what my imaginary assignment is, and I'll explain this, and then I'll give you a second to do it yourself. So read this first. Does that make sense? My screencast would have been about how I want to think about where are people actually doing collaborative writing. When I say ghost written books, I don't know if people are familiar with that term. It often happens in like a memoir. For instance, I recently read Tori Amos's second memoir that just came out called Resistance. And Tori Amos, the piano player artist, she was the only author on the book. But it was actually her second book. Her first book, it was authored by Tori Amos, big famous name, with some name you've never heard of. And that happens a lot with celebrities. It'll be book by famous person with this other name you haven't heard of. And what it means is often is that it's a ghost writer. It means that someone actually helped them do the writing. In some cases, it just means like literally the person who's the famous person, sometimes they literally didn't do any actual writing at all. It might just be the ghostwriter interviewed them, got a lot of interesting tape, and tried to write what they said in the recording into their words and organize it into a book. Often these days, those are acknowledged, but it's not always acknowledged. Sometimes it's kind of hidden. Sometimes you have to know about it. Who knows? So I was like, that's interesting. People working together to write, just like Woodmansey said. Cool. I'm also thinking about like TV writing rooms, you know, like an episode often has like of a TV show says this was written by this person. Should I tell you this? I watched an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer last night, dear to my high school heart, and that episode was written by Marty Noxon. But I bet Marty Noxon sat in a room with a bunch of people, and they all said, "What should happen in this episode?" You know, they kind of worked it out. I'm also thinking about political speeches. You know, if Trump or Biden, have you heard of those guys? If they got up and made a speech, often we say Trump is responsible for those words. Biden is responsible for those words. But often we all know they were written by other people. So interesting ways there's collaboration going. Okay. So let's say I'm trying to make an outline that includes something about Woodmansey. And the question that I'm asking myself is, where is that going to go? And the question I want you to ask yourself is, What about the sources you came up with? What about those 3 sources that you've either annotated or are planning to annotate really soon? Where are you going to use those sources in your essay? And this is where I think an outline might help. So let me show you a couple more slides about how I would think of this through and how I want you to think it through. Let's say I need a paragraph somewhere that's using Woodmansey. Well, and I start thinking, what do I need to do before that? And for me, it's actually pretty clear. Let's say each of these bullets is a paragraph, and I need one paragraph that does this and one paragraph that does that. So again, I'll be quiet and let you read that. In other words, my sentence outline is starting to make me think maybe my Woodmansey paragraph is paragraph 3 of my essay. Maybe like there's kind of a 2-paragraph intro, some kind of attention getter, and some kind of like thesis, what I'm up to here. Hey reader, here's my point. And then I'm like, what am I going to do after Woodmansey? And I start thinking, well, I bet after that, I can get into like my ghostwriting example, because the more I think about Woodmansey, it's about books, collaborative books, right? The physical act of making books. And I can say, well, my example of ghostwriting authors is also kind of about books. So I bet I can have a paragraph about her, and then a paragraph about kind of my example. I hope that basic idea makes sense. So in other words, the way to make a sentence outline isn't necessarily to start at the top, even though it can be. What I would do though is ask, what sources do I have that I can imagine are so good I might even want to use a whole paragraph to talk about it? But then where's that paragraph going to go? What's going to come before it, and what's going to go after it? So I actually do want to pause here and see if you could just try writing an outline of your own thing. I'm not going to ask you to share unless you want to, but I will ask, did that lead to anything interesting? You know, did outlining something surprise you or teach you something or lead to a question that you want to ask? So I'm actually going to watch the clock here and just kind of be quiet for 5 minutes, starting now. So I would just ask you to get up some document, handwrite it or type it, and just try to outline your project a little. Like I said, I'll start a timer on my phone. You can chat with me on the side if you want. I'll maybe don't talk out loud here, but if you want to ask questions while you're doing it, I'll keep looking in the chat. Okay, I'm turning the recording back on after turning it off for a couple of minutes. My hope is that this kind of like giving yourself room to just focus entirely on what you're doing and think it out will give you a chance to better understand it yourself, but also will give you something to talk to me about. Like, honestly, I'm thinking that if you just took those 5 minutes and you just have a few kind of random lines, you now all of a sudden have something to email me and ask about, right? You can just say, hey, Dr. Seven, here's what I came up with. Is this weird? Is this not weird? This source, can't see where I'm going to put it yet. What am I going to do? Honestly, having problems right now is okay, because identifying the problem helps you think of ways to solve it in your essay. Thinks of giving you ideas of where to put something somewhere else that it will make more sense. So we don't have to have a conversation about this, but we can. I guess, is there anything that came up in those 5 minutes that surprised you or that led to a question that's worth us kind of talking about here? Again, either out loud or in the chat. I'll pause for a second just in case.
I have a question, Dr. Sadman.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to like explain something in your essay and you summarize an article that you found, is that plagiarism or is that okay?
To me, it all depends on how much you're actually relying on the language that someone else wrote. So I would never call it plagiarism if you summarized, if by summary you mean thinking through what did a larger thing have to say and how can I, in my own words, summarize it. I think
Yeah.
the problem comes specifically when you're doing things that are more like the patchwriting, when you're using phrases and sentence structures that seem to have come from someone else. Does that answer? I don't know.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you for asking that.
Yeah.
Oh, I think we're at different speeds. I don't know if I'm going slow or you are. One of us has a bad connection. Let me type that. Uh, I think one of us has a bad connection. Isn't that hard? You don't know if it's you or not. So I didn't hear your response, Nanya, but let's just say that if someone is ever unsure, run it by me. Talk to me about it. Let's compare the two sources together and see. But plagiarism to me is in general um, intentional, and it's sentence level based. You can never be accused of plagiarism in my class, and I would say in most classes, uh, if you're simply taking an idea and putting it into your own words. That's always okay. So here's the thing. For next week, if you're going by my schedule, again, you're trying to take the stuff you read and turn it into 3 pages. The assignment actually even says, use some of the sources that you annotated this week and try to use those in some sample paragraphs for next week. By the way, I won't be super picky about that. That's just me suggesting that there should be like a clear connection between the work you've done and the work you're doing in the future. If you give me 3 pages of writing on something else that don't use the sources that you have here, I won't be mad. I won't double check. You won't lose points. Just so you know. So let's say you're going to write a paragraph and you're like, oh my goodness, what should it look like? Well, I've got here a really long 8-sentence paragraph that talks about Woodmansey in my sample essay. And let me remind you where this goes. This is a paragraph that I'm imagining comes after a 2-paragraph intro, but it's maybe my 3rd paragraph in the entire essay. So let me be quiet and let you read this, and then I'm going to break it down and kind of show you how I did it in hopes that that can inspire you how to write your paragraph. So I'll be quiet. That's a lot. I know it's small text. It's hard to kind of read and understand outside of context. I get that this is tricky for a lot of reasons. I also know I'm really wordy. One of my last sentence is like ridiculously long. Should probably revise that. Still, hopefully you get the sense here that this is the source. But we talked last week about how to use sources, different ways you would use it. I'm assuming that Woodmansey probably literally only shows up here in my entire essay. This is my use of Woodmansey. This counts as one of my check. I'm using one of my 6 sources. And I'm using her, as you can see, just as a jumping off point, just as I guess it kind of makes me look better to be like, hey, by the way, talking about collaborative writing, I'm not going to act like I'm the first person who's ever had this idea. But you might do that about yours, right? You might say, I'm not the first person who's ever talked about, I'm thinking about who's here. Dana and Brianna talking about education, maybe Kayla too, I forget. You're not like, I'm the first person who's ever talked about using lesson plans that have come before me or teaching students about plagiarism and copying. Andrew and Ben, you're not the first people who've ever talked about originality in plays and in movies or in video games, Jose, right? So I'm kind of saying, I get it, but I'm kind of I'm using that in a way to make me look good, not look bad. Like, see, this is a conversation I'm entering, but I'm not just going to like slavishly respond and like say like, I will exactly copy what she says. I've got something a little to disagree with, but something else to move on by. So this is almost like a jumping off paragraph that's about to get me, as you saw, into my real point. Let me just tell you my ideas about ghostwritten books. So let's break this down a little bit. Can I show you what I was up to here? What I did is I took that exact same paragraph and I broke it down sentence by sentence. And over on the right, I tell you what I'm up to here. So just briefly, you could probably figure this out. By the way, I included this kind of bold brackets. I've shown you that before because this is my real way of writing. When I'm drafting stuff, I constantly question myself and comment to myself by putting it in bold brackets. I'm co-writing, talking about co-writing, I'm co-writing a textbook right now with a friend, and we have all these shared Google Docs, and this kind of drives her a little crazy because she likes to add little comments in the Google Doc, you know, like off to the actual side because that kind of looks a little cleaner. And I have this habit of I'm writing it along and I'm like, I don't know about this, or I'll say this paragraph sounds dumb, revise it later, or should I even include this? And I'm constantly doing the bold bracket thing. It's just my thing. I'm not saying you have to do it, but I'm just letting you know that's an option, right? Let me really quick turn to the chat. Ben says this is a requirement, right? We have to find a way to apply Woodency in our essay. Now, okay, and no. You people, you do not have to use Woodmancy. You are not required. There's a line on the assignment page that says, I suggest and expect that you'll probably refer to some of the things in class. And I actually did originally plan to require you to go back and like cite Woodmancy and Church and Dustin Edwards and all those things that we've kind of written about in the discussion boards. I changed that to a suggestion. And in fact, if you do use Woodmancy in your essay, it won't count towards your 6. If you use any of the sources I assigned, it won't count towards your 6. I want you to find 6 sources that you cite. So I'm using Woodmancy as an example here as more of a parallel to something you found. Like imagine that you found some sort of source on your own and you're like, what do I do with that now? And that's what I'm trying to say. How might you use your source? Thanks for asking that. Okay, so you can see I'm using my first sentence to do 2 things, and I think most of your paragraphs should probably do this, often to transition from what came before and to say what this paragraph's about. You know, you should, in a final version of an essay, not in a first draft, of course, but in a final version, you should be able to look at every single topic sentence and be like, is there a connection to what came before, and does it say what's coming up next? Well, yeah, I'm not the only one who thinks book writing, which is something that I just mentioned in my previous paragraph, should be acknowledged as a collaborative project. Well, okay, let's talk about collaborative projects in this paragraph. And these next 2 sentences of my paragraph were my summary. This is like literally just a slightly revised version of that same summary that I maybe copied and pasted straight out of my annotation assignment. You see here, I'm kind of calling it the top bread. That's referring back to the last time we did a Zoom class. We were talking about like the quote sandwich, like introducing a source by saying, hey, here's kind of why this matters and here's what it is, before I kind of put the bottom bread on and kind of say, here's why I told you all that. Nothing too interesting here, right? But my real point, I think, is that I think it would be a lousy paragraph if I started with sentence 2. I think we do that a lot. We start our paragraphs in our first drafts by mentioning sources right away. And I think usually you kind of want to ease into it more. Usually your paragraph shouldn't probably even mention a source, especially if it's the first time. The first sentence of a paragraph shouldn't introduce a source for the first time. There should be some kind of a, hey reader, here's what I'm up to here, here's where I've been, and here's where I'm going. Okay, got it? Now let's talk about Woodmancy. It's not a rule, it's not always, but often when paragraphs start with the name of a source, I'm kind of like, whoa, why are you telling me this? What's the point? What's the context? How does this fit in what we were just talking about? So let's keep going. It was a longer paragraph than just 3 sentences, right? There's 8 total. So next slide. Take a second to just read this on your own. Reread the original sentence and then what I think I'm doing there, and then reread this and what I think I was doing there. Now, I'm using some really basic tricks of the trade to let my reader know how I'm going to think about various things I'm saying with the way I start the sentences and the clauses. Although I agree with up to a point, right? That's a great phrase you could use. Although I agree with my source up to a point, I can't accept, or I think this, right? You know, although blah, 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 after the semicolon, there's an after all kind of explaining why I can't explain it. Again, great phrase. After all, you start a phrase, start a clause, start a sentence with after all. And then this kind of still, on the other hand, despite my disagreement, you know, you can say it however I want, but kind of a flip. I'm really purposely trying to say, I like some of her stuff. I don't like all of her stuff, but I like some of it. So I'm kind of saying, hey, reader, let me acknowledge that I'm not like the biggest Woodmansey fan in the entire world, but here's what I want to pull from her. Again, could you do that? Could you use a phrase like that to say, here's the source I got? One of the requirements for the annotation assignment today was to find a source that was persuasive in some way. I don't know if you were able to find that. I don't know if that worked. Again, I'm not going to be too picky, but I'm hoping you did. I wonder if you can write sentences like this, especially about that source. That'd be awesome. Okay, let me move on. This is sentence 4 and 5, right? Do I need to talk about semicolons? I think you guys know how semicolons work. Essentially, a semicolon, I could have put a period there, but the semicolon says, oh, a period would be so harsh. It would be so separate. It would be like a whole new thing. The semicolon says, this is like two sentences that are kind of connected a little bit. Grammatically, they're still sentences. Both sides of the semicolon could grammatically be their own sentences. If I put a period there and capitalize that A, we'd be grammatically okay. But I felt a connection, so I gave like the lesser connection of a semicolon. You know that. Okay. Next sentences 6, 7, and 8. You can see what I did here. I trying to tie my previous paragraph's points, the ones that I didn't even show you were right yet, to Woodmansey. I'm trying to make this paragraph not feel like it's floating. This happens a lot in essays like this. When I teach research essays, sometimes I feel like you had all your sources open and you're like, let me write a paragraph about Woodmansey. Let me write a paragraph about some other source I use. Let me write a paragraph about some other source. And as I read through the paragraphs, there's no connection. There's no reference to what happened before. It almost feels like each paragraph was on like a playing card, and you just shuffled them up together, and here's an essay. If I shuffled them up a different way, we'd get a different essay. Ding. That's a problem. So as much as you can like say, hey, this thing I'm talking about with the source, that connects to the thing I mentioned earlier. You know, do that in a logical way so that your reader kind of constantly is remembering, oh, right. It's almost like the whole point of an essay is that ideally you could just magically take everything in your head and whoop, make the person get it. You can't. So what do? Well, you have to decide, how am I going to, in order, walk them through so that they'll get my ideas and eventually get to the same place I'm at. But by taking the slow steps, I'm going to take them on, you know. So you don't need to read that right now, but that's what I'm up to there. I threw in this little parenthetical as sentence 7. It's not quite a joke, but it's almost like an aside. It's, yeah, reading it now, I'm kind of like, it's kind of a lousy sentence. It's a little unclear, but sometimes you find yourself wanting to do that. I kind of want to throw in a little joke, throw in a little aside. That's allowed, you know, but I just use parentheses. I could use a footnote instead, who knows? But here, my final ridiculously long sentence, further clarifying how my project's different from Woodmansey's, but also anticipating where I'm going. I'm bringing up ghostwriting again here at the end of my sample paragraph because I know that's where I'm going, because I made my sample outline. So again, just read this last long sentence, just so we can think about that just for a second. Honestly, in some ways, maybe this is a little weird to think about. In some ways, I almost feel like my Woodmansey paragraph ended up being introduction part 3. You know, if I go back to my outline, it's like I got their attention. I said, here's what we're up to. And then I'm like, hey, there's a scholar, Martha Woodmansey, who kind of is doing a project sort of like mine. And I'm kind of like her, but I'm kind of not. Now let's get into the real data, you know, the real stuff that I really am analyzing myself. Let's talk about ghostwriters. Then let's talk about collaborative TV. Then let's talk about political speeches. I'm not really applying Woodmansey specifically to any of them. So I found myself, as I was writing, realizing this is kind of introductory in a way. That's okay. Maybe as you're writing, you'll start to feel that too. Probably what I would do then is kind of like start my next sentence after this with like, example 1, the example of ghostwriters. Like in other words, I I would put in like a marked bold section break, you know, as we've seen in a ton of the essays that we read. A lot of you mentioned section breaks in RA2 in your rhetorical analysis, because a lot of academic essays do that because it helps people kind of know where they're at. You are allowed to do that. All you do is just make it bold, make a little bling, here's the title of what's coming, and then we'll say, oh, okay, new section, sweet, I get it now. That's really helpful. So I know I'm going on and on and on, but here's the idea. If we had time for you to draft your paragraph right now, obviously we don't. Let's say you tried drafting a paragraph using one of those sentences and maybe following kind of what I was doing, kind of some of the looking forward, looking back. I wonder if then you would have to go back to your outline, like I was just kind of saying. Maybe you'd go back and say, now that I've written it, I realize what should have come before and I realize what should have come after. So I think if you actually have a sentence outline that you're actually using to guide your essay, let that be a living document. Let it be something you constantly change. Don't think of yourself as I wrote my outline and now I'm done. Constantly, you know, keep it going. Often personally, I have an outline in the same document that I'm drafting, and I scroll up and I fix a couple things up there, and then I scroll down and I type some more. And I'm like, oh crap, I'm gonna need a paragraph. And I go up and I fix it up there, and then I go back here and I'm moving up and down. It can be a separate document if you want, if you'd rather go between, but it just depends on your style, right? That's actually it. That's all I've got. That's my last slide. I can't move forward anymore. So let me just stop sharing my screen because there's no reason to. My hope is that this might inspire you as you're writing your paragraphs, but without necessarily saying this is the only way to do it. I hope that makes sense. If you find yourself writing over this next week and you're like, you know what, I got this other kind of thing I'm doing and it doesn't seem like anything like what Dr. Stebbins doing. If that feels right to you, you're like, but this is still going to help me. This is still going to help me persuade my reader that my view is right. I would say trust yourself. There really is a sense in which there are lots of right ways to do this. But again, if you're not sure, once you've drafted it, you've got the perfect thing to ask me. Send me that paragraph and say, does it do what I think it does? Email it to the Writing Center and say, hey, can you just tell me about this one paragraph? Here's the context where I think it's going to be. Does this seem confusing or weird or wrong to you in any way? Get that help from them, and I think it'll make you feel stronger. You know, help make you feel like, yes, once you're sure about something in your essay, you'll be able to go on. So let me be quiet here for the very last time and see other questions about how to get those paragraphs drafted, or the questions about anything else in the class that I can help clarify for you. Again, I'm going to pause awkwardly long in case people are typing if they're not in a place where they can talk out loud. I thought Luna the cat might say goodbye, but she's asleep down here, so I'm not going to pick her up to say goodbye. Well then, as always, just leave. Know that the door is open as always, and I'm really looking forward to next week. Just keep your eyes on Canvas to follow those due dates, and I'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. See you later. Bye.